then the question becomes, can publicly traded corporations actually move into this space? And I think the answer is yes, but they come afterward. In a way, it's much easier for privately held companies like ourselves and Dr. Bronner's to say, hey, this is what we want to do, and we're free to do it. We don't have the SEC saying, how are you not meeting the needs of your shareholders by deciding you want to save the home planet. But at the same time, when we do something and we can prove it out that it is actually good for the business or not harmful to the business, we pave the way, I think, for some publicly traded companies, not a lot of them so far, to look at what we're doing and say, hey, they can do this. We want to do this.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Linley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label that distinguishes soil-grown crops and pasture-raised livestock. You just heard Vincent Stanley speaking to the fact that when privately held companies like Patagonia take important planet-friendly risks like deciding to produce clothing with 100% organic cotton, their success can prove the market for other companies to follow suit, who might otherwise have focused solely on profits, often at the expense of the environment. The conversation with Vincent gives us hope that capitalism and environmentalism don't have to be mutually exclusive. But before we dive in, we want to ask you to please take a moment today to leave us a rating and review. Just that small action on your part will make a big difference to our efforts to grow the Real Organic movement. Now let's get back to the conversation between my co-director Dave Chapman and Patagonia's Vincent Stanley.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast, and I am speaking today with Vincent Stanley. I'm very pleased. Vincent's been a long time part of the Patagonia management. I think he probably was at Patagonia before there was such a thing as management, where there was just a small team back in 1973. He has served as head of sales and of marketing, and is the co-author with Yvon Chouinard of The Responsible Company: What We've Learned from Patagonia's First 40 Years. So welcome, Vincent.
Well, thanks for having me, Dave.
It's such a pleasure. How did you come to be a part of Patagonia? How did that happen back in the day?
I came to Patagonia in a kind of odd fashion. So I was not a climber. And we hadn't started Patagonia yet. It was still Chouinard equipment, mountain climbing equipment. And Yvon Chouinard's my uncle. And I had been involved in alternative education and went to an experimental high school that I helped run, and then edited a magazine. And then all of a sudden, after all that brilliant start to my career at the age of 20, there's a recession. I'm working in a car wash in January in Southern California when it's raining. I'm working for about 2 hours a day for $1.50 an hour. So my grandmother, whose English was her second language, sent me a postcard with a long run-on sentence that said, "I hear you're hard up. Why don't you ask your uncle for a job? I hear he pays his men $3 an hour." Right. So that was I thought, well, I loved, Yvon had been my childhood hero. He's about 13 years older than I am. And I remember as a kid in San Francisco, he and his friends coming through town from Yosemite and sleeping in the backyard with their sleeping bags. They were bearded, they were physically fit. They were very strange animals for an urban kid in San Francisco in 1959 or 1960. So I loved the equipment he made, even though I didn't use it. I thought it was beautiful. I loved the quality and the whole idea of the climbing world. So I asked Yvon for a job, and I couldn't get $3 an hour. That was for the master hammer builders, for the trained craftsmen. But I typed invoices, did accounts receivable, bookkeeping, and shipped boxes, and that was the start of it. And then a career quickly advanced because I was not a surfer, so I tended to be the last person in the office when the waves were firing, and answered the phones to take the orders. And Yvon tapped me on the shoulder and said, "How'd you like to be sales manager?" And I said, "What's that?" And he says, "I don't know. You figure it out." So that's how we got started.
Yeah, that's wonderful, right? I mean, really, you all had no idea what you were doing. It was really just doing something really for joy of it and playing. I think that's marvelous. So what was it like? Well, was it a big transition to Patagonia from the Chouinard tool company?
It was interesting how we got into the clothing business, because Chouinard equipment had a reputation as the best climbing equipment in the world, and we probably had 70% of the market share. And this was a global business. We had climbers coming through all year long to just to visit and to talk. We had people working from all over the world. A global business with sales of less than $1 million a year. And it was a world of maximum 3 degrees of separation, because everybody we sold to was a friend of a friend, or a friend of a friend of a friend. So there weren't opportunities, and the investments were huge in tools and dies to make the gear. So the idea of getting into the clothing business, I think, really came from Yvon's best friend, Doug Tompkins, whose wife was a clothing designer. He had already started a couple of companies in Hong Kong. He later started Esprit. So he had the contacts. And Yvon also, sort of serendipitously, in 1971 had gone into a department store in Edinburgh and looked at a rugby shirt and thought, this is fantastic for climbing, because rugby shirts, the players are literally trying to tear them off each other's backs. So they're really made super strong, tightly woven fabric, rubber buttons, tightly sewn. So he imported those. And we started a little bit of a craze. It was like it became a little fashion hit. This little company in Ventura shipping out these rugby shirts. So that gave him all a taste for getting into the clothing business. And we used the contacts with Tompkins to develop the first 3 products. We came up with the name Patagonia, which was a celebration of Yvon's trip of a lifetime in 1968, where he and Tompkins and 2 others drove down to Patagonia, to the tip of Patagonia from Los Angeles. You could still do that for a 6-month trip of climbing, surfing, and skiing. So that was the origin of the business. Was kind of serendipitous, but also our aim was to support the climbing equipment company. We had no idea what we were doing. None of us had any management experience, let alone experience in apparel. So it was really kind of touch and go for the first couple of years. I think we struck a chord with our customers, the outdoor shops, from the beginning. They liked the story. Backpacker ran an article saying, "What's a blacksmith doing making clothes?" And so we had a lot of goodwill. And I think that helped us through the early years.
The business grew when it started. When there was 1973, I think, was the first year of Patagonia.
Yeah, 73.
How many people were in the company at that point?
When I started at the company in March of 73, there were about 10 or 12 people, mostly men and mostly hammering out the gear. That year we added, there's a picture of us all on the porch at the end of December 1973, and there are about 23 of us, including seamstresses, and the company really changed kind of overnight when we got into clothing. And then we also opened a retail store at the end of the same year.
Well, obviously the company grew a bit, and I'm fascinated by the fact that You write in The Responsible Company that there's kind of a club of good guys, of companies that are known for trying to do something actually positive for the world beyond making money. And this is relatively unusual in the business world, although there's a lot of lip service given to it. And I think that it's true that I think Patagonia and Bronner's and Nature's Path and some of these companies really are different. And one of the things I notice is that they're all still privately held. They're not public corporations. And I'm curious, do you have any thoughts about that? Do you think it's possible to go public and still retain those values and that mission?
It's an interesting question about as to whether a company like Patagonia or some other companies, Dr. Bronner's is very notable, could have done what we've done if we had been public corporations. And I think the answer is no. With some elaboration to that. A privately held company can take risks, apparent risks, that a publicly traded company can't. But we can do things that can then illustrate to publicly traded companies, hey, this is possible, and it's consistent. It's good business as well as good for the planet or good for human communities. This is the learning process we went through. These were the difficulties. So you have now, for instance, Danone. It's a French company with yogurt, Evian water, a lot of baby food brands. Their North American subsidiary has become a B Corp. It's the largest B Corp in the world, $6 billion a year. And he is committed to, 17 subsidiaries of Danone have become B Corps. They are committed to taking the whole company B. They have the potential to do some really interesting work in agriculture. They're not there yet.
Vincent, can I interrupt you for a minute? Because we're going to have a very diverse audience, and a lot of people don't have any idea what a B Corp is. So could you explain that to us?
Gotcha. Yeah. Let me back up a bit, if you don't mind. When we got started in the clothing business, we had no intention of being a responsible company. Our idea of responsibility was really derived from being in the climbing equipment business, where the customers are trusting their lives to the quality of your gear. But when we looked in the 1970s at the environmental impact of what we did, we didn't think about it. That was something you thought the government should take care of in terms of their regulations. We didn't think about the impact of steel or iron for the climbing equipment we made because we didn't think we could influence that. We didn't think about that for the fabrics we were using. And it was only over time that we discovered the implications, particularly of the fabrics we were using, especially with cotton. We thought of cotton as this benign natural fiber, and it turned out to be among the 4 fibers we used: nylon, polyester, wool, cotton. Cotton was by far the most damaging because of the intense use of chemicals to prepare for planting, to fertilize, and to add pesticides. So this was a gradual realization for us that we had the responsibility for using these chemicals, even though we didn't use them ourselves, but we used fabrics that were made out of them. And did we have a choice? Could we go in and say, listen, we don't want to do this, we want to do it another way? When we started to ask these questions, when we made the transition to organic cotton in the early 90s, nobody else was doing this. Some companies were doing small eco brands that would take a very small part of their of their business and to sort of do the right thing. When I hired our first environmental manager in 1992, and we had to hire somebody from the city of Irvine because there was nobody with the title sustainability or who knew how to do a life cycle analysis outside of the oil, chemical, and gas industries where we weren't likely to find someone. So the movement toward business feeling a sense of responsibility for its own actions has been gradually growing. Very different now than the 70s and very different from the 90s. You now have a group of companies called B Corps. And the B stands for benefit. And it's a movement of companies who want to take social and environmental responsibility for their actions. We submit to what's called an impact assessment every 3 years, which actually is the only holistic look that we have at all of our practices. Everything from the ratio of pay of the CEO to the lowest paid employee to whether we use permeable concrete for the parking lot. So what's happened is you have a group of companies, a growing group of companies who are really looking at our own actions and also working together. We cooperate with Dr. Bronner's in the creation of the regenerative organic standard. And then the question becomes, can publicly traded corporations actually move into this space? And I think the answer is yes, but they come afterward. In a way, it's much easier for privately held companies like ourselves and Dr. Bronner's to say, hey, this is what we want to do, and we're free to do it. We don't have the SEC saying, how are you not meeting the needs of your shareholders by deciding you want to save the home planet. But at the same time, when we do something and we can prove it out that it is actually good for the business or not harmful to the business, we pave the way, I think, for some publicly traded companies, not a lot of them so far, to look at what we're doing and say, hey, they can do this. We want to do this. The head of Danone is a 26 billion euro company, lots of subdivisions, publicly traded, based in Paris. And the CEO, Emmanuel Fabre, said at a meeting when he made his North American subsidiary, which is the largest B Corp in the world, $6 billion, when he successfully made that a B Corp, he said he was first inspired to take all of Danone to B Corp status by Patagonia's Don't Buy This Jacket ad, because it taught him that you could appeal to customers on the basis of values as well as instincts. So Danone is one big publicly traded company that can make a huge difference if it really changes its agricultural practices. Unilever is another company that is slowly making some of its subsidiaries B Corps, and they're experiencing that half of their growth and half of their profits are coming from the 10% of their brands that they label sustainable. Long answer to your question, can publicly traded companies do this? The answer is yes. Can a privately held company go public and still do this? That I'm not so sure. I think that if you're going to take a mission-driven company public, you've got to make sure that the rules of the road are established very well. I think you have to be a B Corp in the first place. That the investors who are buying in for your mission as well as for the opportunity.
Okay, so this is such an important conversation. First, let me just say to people who are listening that The Responsible Company that you and Yvon Chouinard wrote together is a tremendous book. It's very short. and it's very easy to read. I know that Ken LaRose said he ordered it by the caseload for the people in his green bank, just gave it to them and said, read this. This will help you understand what we're trying to do. So I agree it was an important book. And I got it when I went to a Patagonia, because I was in New York City visiting my son, and I was cold. And I needed to buy a coat. And I thought, well, I'm going to buy one at the Patagonia store because I support what Patagonia is doing. It was really that simple. And I went there, and while I was there, I thought, oh, great, a little book. And I bought it, and I was like, okay, this is a very important book. So it raises a lot of questions, and I think, one of the things, it's a beautiful, it tells the story of the growing awareness of Patagonia as a company about the fact that, in fact, they were involved with things that were damaging to our world, that they didn't want to have happen, but how do you change it? And we'll talk about cotton because that's so important. But I just want to say it really brings up the question of the tragedy of the commons. Garrett Hardin's book, which was, or essay, it wasn't a book, and which is that, when we all work from our own personal self-interest, and yet we share a common resource, and we approach that resource as how does it profit us personally, the resource gets exhausted. And whereas if we own it, then we have, it's our private little piece of pasture, we're more likely to take care of it in the long run and see that it's something that maybe our children would inherit. And I think that the challenge that we face as a species now is that inextricably we are connected to a commons. It doesn't matter if you just protect your little field, that what somebody else does in their field is going to either doom the species or save the species. And this is the situation we find ourselves in. Would you agree with that?
No, I agree with that. I'm not sure I agree with the conclusions of the tragedy of the commons. I think that there are other models you can look at. It's indisputable that is a tendency and that is a possibility. But even in major cities, I know just an example in New Haven, about a mile from Yale University, there's a block of vacant lots, kind of deserted. Some people came in and started to put in an organic garden. And the neighbors, it's a very poor neighborhood, they see these people working in the lots and doing some planning, and they're going, what the hell are the people doing invading our neighborhood? And they're kind of suspicious. But then people start going in, and then they start planting things. And pretty soon everybody in the neighborhood is kind of looking out for this space where they're coming together to plant good food and to harvest. So I think there's also the possibility to love the commons as a place. Now, the national parks are not owned except by all of us in general, as pasture land was kind of commons in the 17th century. So I think that there's a way to form an attachment to a place that is not owned. The American Indians didn't practice, they weren't perfect in terms of their relationship to the environment, but they were a lot better than we were, and they had absolutely no sense of ownership of the land. That would have been a foreign concept to them. So I think there are other models. I think what we have to return to, what we've lost a lot with globalization, is a sense of place and a sense of protecting the places that we love and the places where we live. I mean, I think most people don't know in the place they live where the water comes from. What's the watershed? What are the local forests? What is it? What are the natural systems upholding my expectation that I turn on a light for electricity or turn on a faucet and get water? And I think if we start to restore that sense and also to rebuild local economies, which we've let go in favor of globalization and chain stores, and we're reliant on a very highly networked economic system that doesn't have much of a local component. And I think that needs to be stronger, and that helps make people care about what they are and to preserve what they have. And human beings never had this effect on the world before. It's cumulative, where we can screw up everything at once. And I think as we start to understand that and experience that, then I think we have the potential to change behavior.
Yeah, that's right. There's a story that I share sometimes. A friend of mine is a labor historian at Dartmouth, and she attended the 100th anniversary of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. I don't know if you're aware, about that? Yeah, in the Lower East Side of New York.
Yeah.
Big turning point in American labor history when, there's a terrible fire in the garment district and many people were killed because there were no safety provisions. Nobody could get out of the building. It was essentially locked and they died. And because of that, and the pictures in the Lower East Side of bodies lined up on the sidewalk, there was a tremendous response from America. And another person who spoke at that, my friend spoke at that, and another person who spoke was a labor activist from Sri Lanka. And she said, the same situation exists today. And people are dying in fires every week in Sri Lanka in unsafe working conditions. But because it's so far from the markets, because we're the market, U.S. is the market for this clothing that's made there, that there's this disconnection and people are no longer moved by what happens. And I think that this is such a powerful example of the dire downside of globalization, which is that when things happen far away, and you reap the benefits, but you don't pay the price. And so I think at Patagonia and the Responsible Company, you've really taken that on, saying, let's look at this. Well, let's start talking about cotton, because you looked at cotton and everybody thinks cotton sounds great. It's what's stuck in the head of the bear aspirin. It's very clean and it's natural. So what did you discover? You make and sell a lot of clothing. What did you discover when you said, let's understand about the cotton that we're using?
Yeah. It was interesting. It was shocking for us to find out that cotton was not a benign natural fiber. It was a natural fiber, but not a benign one. And it was totally accidental. We had a store. We opened a store in Boston, and we had to shut it down 3 days later because our employees were getting headaches and stomach aches. So we called in an environmental engineer, and he fixed the system, but we said, what was the agent causing people to get sick? And he said, that was formaldehyde off-gassing from the cotton clothes stored in your basement. And so that got our attention. And we commissioned a study on the 4 fibers we use: wool, nylon, polyester, and cotton were the big 4. Expecting oil-based fabrics to be the worst environmentally. It turned out to be cotton. And not the formaldehyde is a problem, but the big problem was the intense use of chemicals, organophosphates to prepare the plants that were developed as nerve gases for World War I. And just a whole host of chemicals that just create havoc. One of the things we did was to create a t-shirt line. We experimented a little bit and said, okay, we're going to use organic cotton. It was still grown in China and Turkey, and there's a cooperative in Texas we still buy organic cotton from because they lost a family member to cancer in the 70s, suspected spraying, and went organic forever. And we decided, Yvon decided, listen, I don't want to be in this business. I'll get out of sportswear if we can't make a switch to organic for everything. And sportswear is about 1/3 of the business at that time. We did all our homework. We bought most of the organic cotton being grown in the San Joaquin Valley. We learned how to pray for rain. Would have been wiped out if the rain hadn't fallen. And but we hadn't done enough homework, because what happened is that when we bought the cotton from the farmers, we broke our connection to the global supply chain. So the farmers had no relationship to spinners who turn the fiber into yarn, no relationship to the weavers and knitters who turn that into fabric. So our people start to tell us, listen, I've got to do everything I did last season. I've got to design the line, spec it. We've got to do the colors. We take it to the major customers. And, oh, by the way, I've got to find an entire new infrastructure to make cotton sportswear. And we've got to raise the prices $3 to $5 on everything, because organic is more expensive. And not a single customer has ever asked us for this. So why are we the suckers? Why are we the martyrs? Can't somebody else do that, play that role? And what we did is we ended up, because the more we learned, the more we were convinced that we did not want to be using those chemicals. So we took people out to the cotton fields, 40 at a time in buses. And the first thing you noticed when the buses got into cotton country was the smell of the organophosphates. You notice the absence of birds anywhere near cotton fields. That if you got out of the bus and put your hand in the soil, there was no life in it. It takes earthworms 3 years to come back. There's no vegetation. Basically, you have an outdoor factory of the cotton plants held mechanically in place in dead dirt. No life to the soil, fed fertilizers, fed pesticides, fed enormous amounts of water. And then we take people at the end of the day to an organic field that didn't smell like a factory, that did have the presence of birds, that you could dig your hand in the dirt and it was soil, you could get a worm in your hand. And this was transformative for us, because I think when people came back from those trips, they said, yeah, this is a royal pain. This is really hard for a business to do, but the company's doing the right thing and we're going to make it happen. And that transformed the culture of the company, I think, because after that point, it's almost, if you're a surfer, you want to surf a bigger wave. If you're a runner, you want to run faster. When you start to tackle some of the big environmental problems related to your business, you want to tackle the next big problem. So it was huge for us to make that change.
Was that, certainly you had to raise the price of the clothing that was all organic. And as you say, there was no consumer demand for that at the time. You survived, though.
Yeah.
Did that create the market? I'm trying to figure out how you lead the change. We see that a change needs to come. And honestly, Vincent, I am still stunned by the number of people I know who are in agreement with me about almost everything, but they won't pay for an organic cotton t-shirt or an organic cotton hat. And I go, do you know what you're supporting when you do that? Because it's so easy to avoid that. It's so easy to look the other way and go, well, it's 100% cotton. So how do you create the change so that the business can survive?
It's been interesting. We made the switch 25 years ago to organic cotton, and business has not followed us. 1% of all cotton grown is organic. What has shifted in those 25 years is the adoption of BT cotton, or GMO cotton, which reduces the number of chemicals used, but does not bring the soil back to health, and is going to be problematic over time. There's a whole, to change people's perception, because yes, I'm wearing an organic cotton shirt. Well, I can't tell the difference when I put this shirt on between this and a non-organic cotton shirt. So that's one of the first steps. People look at it and they say, oh. the other thing is I think people have gotten so used to the idea of cheapness and convenience in consumer goods, in food and in clothing. So clothing is much cheaper than it was in the 1970s if you account for inflation. People buy twice as many pieces of clothing as they did 20 years ago, and they use them half as long before getting rid of them. So you've created an expectation. You've also created that in kind of conventional processed foods, where it's cheaper to feed your family on a Big Mac than it is organic broccoli. We have to kind of change the expectation of what our experience is with the things that we eat or the clothes we wear, and say, okay, maybe I'm not going to have huge amounts of meat with every meal, but I'm going to buy higher quality food that treats the land well, that's more nutritious. I'm not going to have 50 hoodies in varying shades of orange and green. I'm going to have 3 or 4 well-made hoodies that are going to last longer than anybody else's. This is a different mentality. What we're trying to encourage with customers, because I think in the world of fashion, that the moment of deepest erotic attachment to what you bought is the moment you hand your credit card over the counter and something that you wanted, you now have, right? And we've been kind of fortunate because I think a lot of people love the Patagonia goods for what they were able to do in it, because they were doing something they love in some places they love to go. So you build up this sense of experience. We run the largest repair facility in North America for clothing, and that's because people don't want to give things up. They want to keep them going, and that's the proper way to do it. So I do think with food, people care about their health. Mothers especially care about their kids' health. I think there we've got the way in to change people's experience of how they relate to the things they buy. Then clothing can follow. It's hard to lead with clothing because people don't see the same connection. And also, as you were mentioning, we have no sense of the global supply chain for clothing, of where it comes from, and how the workers are treated, and how the environment is treated. I mean, a few years ago, the rivers in Vietnam were colored indigo from the dye from the jeans factories. You had the Rana Plaza collapse a few years ago. You had just this year during COVID, the apparel companies, the rich brands of Europe and the United States, walked away from clothes that they had made and told the factories, you keep it, we're not paying for it. You've made it for us, but we're not paying for it. And so there's a kind of, there's no, talk about moral hazard. When you have no idea of what your purchase results in halfway across the globe, there's no way for you to care. So it's important, I think, to ramp up transparency and for people to understand what is the environmental report card for this product that I'm buying. As it is also important to build up for all of us a sense of place. You don't have to have a global supply chain to lose track of everything. I think people in cities have no idea what conditions are in rural America, and the degradation of both the economy and the landscape.
Yeah, transparency is such a huge issue. Of course, that's why the Real Organic Project exists, is that we're struggling to get transparency and integrity in what people are getting when they buy organic. And, we're very aligned with the regenerative organic certification in this, which is that people are often misled now. I mean, on a huge scale in the National Organic Program, they're certifying on a massive scale confinement livestock. The vast majority of the eggs and poultry that are certified organic in America are coming from confinement operations. Chicken's never been outside in its life, from cradle to the grave. Yeah. And the same is happening in fruits and vegetables. You know, hydroponics has now become the norm in certified organic tomatoes and is rapidly becoming the norm in certified organic blueberries. And it's going to be the norm in certified organic strawberries. That, you know, things are moving, peppers. And, you know, the slogan of the hydroponic producers was, everyone deserves organic. And what they were saying, they're very good at that, aren't they?
Everything can be called organic.
They're very good at that. And, you know, because it's right. Everybody does deserve organic. We agree with that, of course. It's just that, you know, just because you put a Volvo sticker, you know, on the cheap car doesn't make it a Volvo. And so the question is, as we deal with greenwashing, which I'm sure is something that you have thought a lot about, we want these big companies to come in. We want them to come in. We want Dannon to come in. We want General Mills to come in. But we don't want them to come in and just change what they call it. We want them to come in and change how they do it. Yeah. We want them to change how they farm. And so, and I do think that there is something that is always better if something is produced regionally, locally, on a smaller scale. There is something that gets lost at a bigger scale. So we do our best. Some things are going to be bigger, some things are going to be smaller. But I'm just curious how you deal with that conflict of, there must be things that Patagonia has in fact led the way on, and other people have said, that's great. We want to be in that picture too, but they haven't actually changed what they do.
What happens is standards is always a struggle. And I think Rodale's, which really helped develop the certified organic program decades ago, has been disappointed that it has not been a progressive project. It has not been continuously improved or defined. And there's often a tendency with certifications to drag down the standard and to make it easier to achieve and cheaper to achieve. And it's more prevalent. It's prevalent everywhere. We've had more success, I think, with clothing than in agriculture. But with clothing, what we don't have is a strong consumer-facing index, which I think is going to come out from Higg Index Sustainable Apparel Coalition next year, in which all the companies that are part of that, and a lot of big companies are part of it, so you can take your cell phone up against a hang tag on a pair of Wrangler jeans or Levi's next to them or Patagonia next to them and get a scorecard of the environmental and social impact. Great. That would be a good system because everybody is using the same methodology. You reduce the question of greenwashing. But I think with organics, the challenge will be to make these distinctions. So you don't want to drive Walmart back into using a lot of chemicals in carrots, but you don't want Walmart carrots. You don't want people to think that Walmart carrots are the equivalent of what you're getting at the farmer's market. And hydroponics, okay, growing hydroponic tomatoes is doing nothing for the soil. There has to be a growing knowledge base and a growing sense of distinctions, which is natural for people over time to say, okay, organic, everything is the same that's organic. Now let's take a closer look. No, there's a better way to go. The other thing I think that Yvon has been really strong on is that we need to connect, there's a trifecta, we need to connect nutrition taste, and healthy soil. And if we can convey that those three things are equivalent, I think we've got a good way forward to bring more people along to recognize that a regenerative organic standard is going to make a big difference.
Yeah, I agree. It's, I see this tremendous opportunity and this tremendous problem, and they're woven together. And the opportunity that we should celebrate is that 35 or 40 million Americans are buying organic food regularly. And, that's progress. It really is, that they're choosing to pay more because they want to support that kind of farming. They want to give their kids that kind of food. And at the same time, we're seeing that I don't know what to call it except the colonization of the National Organic Program by multinationals who are claiming the brand, but they're not changing how they farm to align with those traditional practices. And that's the lack of transparency. And that's, they got a lot of power. Big corporations have a lot of power. And so, how do we, the people, get connected enough in order to find what we want and to get the transparency in the system so that we can buy the food that we want, support the systems that we should support, that we need to support.
Absolutely. I think, and there again, that's why we need stronger distinctions and transparency. You're going to bring people along probably a little too slowly, but it does take time to bring people along. But they have to be able to graduate from buying what they call an organic carrot at Albertsons to buying a real carrot at the farmer's market.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm kind of cheered by is when I go to the farmer's market now, I see people of all races and people of all income groups at the farmer's market, whereas 15 years ago it would be white folks with good jobs. So, I think it is growing in the right way.
Yeah, yeah. I see two kind of colliding forces in American culture right now. I'm curious what you think. One of the people I've interviewed for this is a man named Seth Godin, and I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's a writer, and I really enjoy his thinking. And he said that when asked, well, what's one of the big things that you think differently now than you did 5 years ago? And he said, 5 years ago, I was very inspired by the democratizing power of the internet. And I've come to see that there's a very dark side to it, and it's become used as a tool by the alt-right. It's being used to mislead people. And with the rapid growth of big data, it's people are getting better and better at telling us what they think we want to hear in order to buy what they want to sell us. Mm-hmm. And, it's a complicated thing. So I think with the internet, everybody has a microphone. And so somebody like me can get up and say something, and actually thousands of people will hear it and listen. And we form communities that way. But at the same time, we all become a product for people who are good at figuring out how to mine that data. Do you think that, I'm struck by the fact that you said that Patagonia made, I think, a very courageous decision to sell only organic cotton products for cotton, and yet the industry hasn't followed. It's worked out for you. It was a risk, but customers did support it. Is that growing? Will more people come to Patagonia because you're the ones who are selling organic cotton, or is the awareness lagging far behind?
I think in apparel, the awareness lags the awareness of organic food, and As I mentioned, I think the challenge is to come up with better transparency for apparel, so that people understand what goes into their clothes. But there's also something else. I think that you need more people coming into the business who care. It's interesting because I'm often asked when I talk about Patagonia or I talk about what we've done, and people say, well, give me the business argument for behaving better, for being more sustainable. And I say, oh yeah, Rick Ridgway and I have talked about this. We've come up with 9. Sometimes we'll come up with 18. So, minimize reputational risk. You want to attract young people, intelligent, the best young people to come to work for you. You want to drive innovation. There are all kinds of reasons. But ultimately, what I've found is that people really start to do the right thing because they want to do the right thing. And they'll motivate the organization that they influence or that they work for in order to move in that direction. Give you an example, we mentioned the organic cotton story, and one of the complications we ran into is when we went, so all of a sudden we have to find spinners because the farmers don't know spinners. So we're going all around the world. And the spinners say, oh, we hate organic cotton. We don't want to work with this stuff. You got to clean your machines beforehand and afterwards, and it gums them up. And we finally found somebody who in Bangkok who worked with us. It was a big spinning operation. He figured out how to reduce the temperature for the machines, and they're operating so it didn't gum them up. And afterwards, we asked him, why did you do this for us? Everybody else told us no. And he said, I guess I'm a closet environmentalist. And I do think that one of the things that will make a difference is people coming into the business who really determine that they want to do the right thing. And I think that that's a big secret in business because everybody wants to look so tough. And so practical and so bottom line oriented. But the real motivation for change comes from your relationship to place, what you love to do, what your kids shame you into doing, all kinds of things like that.
Paul Hawken has suggested that we've never taken on the failures of capitalism, that we've talked about how to resolve the symptoms, and we see this bad thing happens and that bad thing happens. And capitalism isn't monolithic. There are many, many different kinds of capitalism, many different flavors. But I do think that there's a thing where capitalism is the religion of our time. And so to suggest that maybe I should do something just because it's better for the planet is, it's a certain kind of, it's a very strange thing to say as a business leader. And saying, I know that we're going to lose money by doing this or make less money, but I think we should do it. And to mean it. To say that and mean it is a pretty daunting thing for a business leader.
It's interesting because I think that when people approach the idea of doing the right thing in business to either minimize negative impact, or to create positive good, there's a misconception. There's a kind of conception of there's a compromise between, okay, we're gonna have a business and we're gonna do good, and those things are going to be in tension, and we're going to kind of figure it out along the way. And it's not wrong, but it's not good business. I think what's happened for Patagonia is a kind of evolution from that tension, maybe 15 or 20 years ago, where we had, the product people who were the go-getters, get that market share, stay 10 years ahead of time, go up against the competitors. And you had the tree huggers who are going, we've got to stop doing this, we've got to do that. We're giving 1% of our sales away. And then you have the finance people who are looking out and saying, make sure that all these idiots in the product and the tree huggers are not giving away all of the treasure. So, and nobody won, right? So the company kind of develops by a capillary action of all these forces kind of holding each other in tension. But what happens over time, and I think what businesses need to do, is the constraints that we placed on ourselves, which are big. If I'm an ordinary sports company, I can go to the FIT library in New York and choose from 500 fabrics. Patagonia maybe 50, if that. So we put big constraints on ourselves, but those drive innovation. And that's the potential, the innovative capacity of business to meet the challenges of the time in terms of reducing environmental harm and also creating positive communities. That's where business can do really well, much better than government or NGOs can. So what I see is this potential, make your values your business model. Build your business derived on your values rather than say we're building a business model and we're not going to cross certain lines. It's a much more dynamic way to do it, and it's a way to get all of your stakeholders engaged, from your employees to your customers to suppliers. And if you're a company that has investors, which we aren't, get the right investors. Don't adjust your behavior because you're getting in a bunch of money from Silicon Valley that wants to climb out of the box 5 years later with a 100% return. Don't do that. Get people who want to do what you want to do. This is a small part of business we're talking about, but it's the small part of business that needs to grow. And business is a natural system like anything else. You can't kind of take over the monoculture and expect it's going to behave differently. You need to plant things and cultivate them and harvest them and figure out how to do it better.
Yeah, it's easy to get overwhelmed by the cultural wave of the time and forget that every business is composed of people. Yeah. And thus it's possible to change the people. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think people change, they don't change because we tell them anything. They change because their experience changes. So that was the cotton lesson for us. We could have told our employees 25% of all the damaging chemicals used in agriculture are used on cotton, and cotton is 8% of arable land. Well, we did tell them that. Then, yeah, right. But when you actually go in a bus and you smell it, that's a different thing. When you have your kid at the table, if you're a big plastics company, I heard this story, and your daughter says, I hope you're proud of yourself. After learning about the 5 gyres, you go out and you start to question what you're doing. So yes, I think that the human component is absolutely critical to this, and the farther that we get from the human component, the more mischief we're going to create, because we're going to create these institutional justifications for really bad behavior.
Yeah. What was the name of the guy who did the interface? I think it was called. He did the carpet company. I thought it was such a
Ray Anderson.
Yeah.
He was a saint. Yeah.
Interesting story of a human being who said this isn't right, and he really changed. He really changed how his company did things. Yeah.
Exactly. And I have a friend who ran his family still runs it, a company in Michigan that makes truck grills and garbage cans, who's done amazing things, hiring people out of prison or hiring people right off welfare and going through all of the problems and having the program fail and then keeping going until he succeeds, and then influencing other businesses in the local town, and not, just a kind of straight across business engineer type with a strong conscience and a good ear.
Yeah. Well, models are very, very important, the art of the possible. So it's getting on. I have a couple other questions I want to hit, though. You have said that we're in the middle of the planet's sixth extinction crisis in the book. Mm-hmm. You believe that? Could you talk about that for a moment?
It's interesting because in 2016, in the presidential debate, the environment, in a series of three, they still had more than one debate then. The environment was mentioned twice, I think. And in the last couple of 3 years, we have a lot of emphasis now on climate change. And climate change is unquestionably a huge issue. But we really strongly believe that loss of biodiversity is right there along with it. And the danger is that you could actually probably solve a lot of climate change without addressing biodiversity. You can electrify. We're on our way to electrifying the economy and using renewables as the source of power. That'll happen. But biodiversity loss is something else, and if we continue to lose that, we're thin out the web of life. We're going to have. We're likely to have more COVID crises. We're likely to have crises combined with climate change with food production. And it kind of goes back. Is an interesting divide. When we adopted the mission statement at the end of 2018, we simplified our mission statement to say we're in business to save our home planet. Okay. And this drove me up the wall when we changed that. I thought, oh my gosh, it took 27 years for the company in the first mission statement, build the best product, cause no unnecessary harm, use business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. I was against that when we adopted it 27 years ago because I thought, mission statements are such bullshit. And you use this language, that means that it's a cover. That most mission statements use words like strive or foster, and so they give you an out. You say, we're going to try to do this, and if we don't, well, we'll keep trying. But the original mission statement over 27 years became something that we really inhabited. It became less aspirational. It actually became truer over time. So when Yvon started to talk about we're in business to save the home planet, I said, no, we're not. But what happened is everybody has taken this very seriously, and they start to look at their activities, what they do. This is within the company. They look at their jobs and say, how does this fit into the mission? So kind of a roundabout way to say that what people asked Yvon is, why home planet? Why are we in business to save our home planet? He said, I don't want to go to Mars. And I think that there's a kind of division between people who have a vision of a different kind of economy and also a different way to live. There's kind of a split between people who think a place is important, who think that the natural world is key to our survival, and to those who think that we're going to kind of outlast our human bodies. And with AI, we're going to become big brains, and we're going to go to Mars, and we're not going to need as much oxygen because we're not actually going to be made out of meat. I do think that when people look at the future, there's this kind of division emerging between the tech worlds and the kind of organic worlds. And we're strongly in the camp that believes we're natural beings, and we're part of nature. And we have to recover and restore what we've lost rather than surpass biology and go to Mars.
Yeah. That's great. That's such a daring mission statement, and I would say an intimidating one to try and live under. Do you feel that taking that risk and saying, okay, we're just going to say it, that actually does help to change the culture?
Yeah, the question of aspirational language is something I've changed my mind on because I've experienced the benefit. I'm always suspicious of saying things that saying you're going to do something and you don't really know how to do it. But it turns out that that's not a bad thing, and that we've had this experience repeatedly where aspirational language becomes directional for folks. And I really changed my mind. I saw us start to inhabit that first mission statement rather than just kind of treat it as a plaque on the wall. Everybody really, really took it to heart. I think it helped that we had Let My People Go Surfing. It helped that we had the Responsible Company, that we had a lot more than just a mission statement on a plaque. We had a lot of things that we discussed with employees, that we discussed with customers that were part of the larger conversation. So the mission statement became this distillation of something larger rather than a slogan, bumper sticker slogan.
Well, I appreciate it. I haven't yet made that the mission statement of my farm because I just don't dare, but we need to, obviously.
Yeah.
All right, a couple more, if you have time. You wrote that, and this is a quote, globalization, a man-made but not humanly controlled process, is largely responsible for the current speed at which life turns to sand.
Mm-hmm.
So you wrote that beautifully, and I think there's an awful lot in that sentence. One is that even though we created globalization, we don't control it. And that's such an important idea to wrestle with, that yes, we made all this up out of our minds, but we're not in control. We're like kids who got in the car and we're driving it down the mountain, and we really don't know how to drive.
There's a quote from Peter Senga, I don't think I'll get exactly right, but he says that we're going faster and faster to a place none of us wants to go. And I think that that's the quality of globalization, the accelerated speed. That also goes back to your point about that Paul Hawken made about capitalism. And I think one feature that's kind of hidden from us, I mean, you're a farmer and I work for a clothing company. We're involved with tangible things. And a lot of the economy is not tangible. It's a lot of money that people have made that's chasing very high levels of profit and investing in things and, really driving the cycle in order to squeeze as much new money as possible out of what all of the things that are sold and services that are offered. So you have an acceleration driven not so much by human desire, but by the desire of a few people with a lot of money to keep it and to compound it. So we're going way too fast toward the place we don't want to go. And I think that's slowing down a little bit because we're seeing the effects. I mean, California, the effects of climate change, the fires, 14,000 lightning strikes in 48 hours, creating 600 massive fires. Puerto Rico without electricity for 6 months. You're seeing the kinds of disruptions to the system that went fairly smoothly for a long time. And I think people are waking up to that. So it's really hard. It's not a good thing. It's difficult for people. But at the same time, my wife discovered this. She said the word apocalypse in Greek means uncovering. And what we're doing, I think, is these disasters that are striking us are uncovering some of the weaknesses that we didn't see them as weaknesses before because they were so prevalent and so omnipresent.
Yeah, thank you. That's good. It seems a big debate of our time is whether a healthy economy, as it's called, is more important than social, ecological, and individual health.
Yeah. Well, I would go back. When we talk about economic health versus social and planetary health, there are just a couple of quick points. One is if you look at the long-term health of a business or of economic activity, it lines up pretty well with human health and with planetary health. Because so there's an organization called the Hinokians, the businesses that have been around for 200 years. Okay. Most of them are tiny. So if you're in Japan and you're running a ryokan, an inn, you better take care of that spring for the last 800 years because when that spring goes, so goes your business. So long-term business health can line up, I think, really well. Short-term does not. Short-term business aims disrupt human communities, and they're done at the expense of the planet. So I would kind of go back to the statement about Patagonia as a company. Are you talking about business aims versus your values, versus your mission? But if you line it up, that's where you have the possibilities. And with the economy, there are tremendous economic opportunities to electrify, for clean energy, to electrify the economy. Tremendous opportunities if we can figure out solve some of the distribution problems with organics and with regenerative organic agriculture. You can build a good economy on that. And it is not a question. I think the political parties have ill-served us on this, both Democrat and Republican, of talking about conventional economic growth as a way to get past our problems. We'll get 5 steps richer, and we'll raise all the boats. And I don't think that that's happening. And that's why you have, on the one hand, Trumpsters in the middle of the country and in the rural areas who have not been served by the economy based on Apple, Google, Amazon. And then you have the people in the inner city, the people of color, who have not been served by this extraordinarily wealthy economy. I mean, Patagonia's done well by it, but you have a lot of people in this country, maybe half, maybe more, who are not served. And we need an economy that works for everyone. And the economy we have is going to serve fewer and fewer people, not everyone.
Vincent, I feel like we could talk for hours more, but I'd be respectful of your time. So we'll maybe just talk about hope for the future. Paul Hawken doesn't like to talk about hope because he thinks it becomes an excuse for inaction. But let's look at hope as actually a motivator for action. And for me, I'm focused on the Real Organic Project, and what I have found is I pull this string and I just keep finding that it's connected to everything. And I've been amazed at that. I really, I was a almost hermit-like farmer for many years, and I got involved in this over what I thought was a simple lack of integrity on the National Organic Program's part. But my goodness, it's just gone on and on and on. It's become a pretty big conversation for me with many, many people. What is your thought about hope for the future, about what people can do? So about action, where's the place that we have choices in our life where we can make a difference? Because I know people actually go almost to depression. They feel overwhelmed. What can I do?
it's interesting when you raise the question of hope. I'm kind of a neutral guy. I'm not a very hopeful, and I'm not very pessimistic. Yvon Chouinard, whom I've worked with all my adult life, describes himself as a doom bat. Totally pessimistic, thinks the world's going to hell and never coming back. But that's never stopped him from doing anything. And never stopped him from doing the right thing. He's never said, oh, to hell with it. And I think that this quality of noticing that something is wrong and then doing something to correct it, I think that that's such an important part of human agency. It's such a part of what doesn't necessarily make us happy, but gives us satisfaction. That forget about hope. Do what engages you. And the other thing is we don't know. I mean, the signs are not good. But the fact is that we don't know what the future is. And what I've discovered over 40 years of working is you're making the future all the time. I'm much less cynical than I was when I was 40. Because when I was 40, the world seemed like a fixed place that I couldn't influence very much. And what I see now is that the people I've worked with for 40 years have made a difference. There are differences in the world because of who they were and what they did. And I know that that's possible also for the future. There's also a big generational shift that I work a lot with students in various schools, regularly at Yale, especially with joint students between the business and the environmental programs. And the whole, the perspective changes over time. It is like farming, where we've grown some people who have a very different perspective than that perspective of the people we grew up with or followed. So there was another quote from from Paul Goodman a long time ago. It said, human beings tend to get everything wrong before they get it right. So it may be that we needed to have the folly of pursuing things faster and faster toward where we wanted to go before we discovered where we wanted to go.
Vincent Stanley, we will end there. Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Dave. It's really a pleasure to meet you and talk to you.
Yeah, for me too.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. We hope that you'll subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a review on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you found us. A video version of this interview, as well as the full transcript with links related to today's conversation, can be found at realorganicproject.org/episode 18. Please join us next time for an interview with the late, great Enid Wonnacott. She's the longtime director of NOVA Vermont, and Enid helped write the language in the current Organic Foods Production Act, and her perspective on the original intent to keep the farmer voice strong at the national level, it's especially relevant to our conversation. To find a Real Organic farm near you, visit realorganicproject.org/farms.